Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Line update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Also, official State of State merchandise is available now. Support the show and grab State of State t-shirts, hoodies, hats, and more. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State. I'm Tom Hannafin. He's Justin King. Penn State football is entering its third week of spring practices. It all culminates on April 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern time with the blue-white game, which will not be televised. So if you're in the State College area, you're going to have an exclusive look at the Penn State football program thus far in 2025. Justin, there's a lot to touch on today. The wide receiver competition, the depth at cornerback has been something that's been talked about. The depth at linebacker is something that's been talked about as well. The pending House Settlement, which we're awaiting some more information on. The spring portal window opens up a week from today on the 16th, runs through the 25th, the Retain the Roar campaign. So a lot of stuff for us to touch on. I want to start with what everybody will be talking about until the end of time. Penn State's wide receivers. There was a lot discussed last week by James Franklin. Marcus Hagans also was interviewed on the subject, and it just feels like the pressure has been turned up on the room in general, understandably so. Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross getting a lot of attention. Some think Devontae Ross is going to be able to contribute as a kick returner, punt returner as well, something he did at Troy, so that shouldn't be a surprise there. But there was a lot of discussion from comments made by James Franklin about Tyseer Denmark, and his words were essentially, no one cares that he's a redshirt freshman. We need him to produce this upcoming season. You've had a chance to obviously be close to the program, attend spring practices. You and I have talked a lot about Tyseer Denmark. What do you think about Franklin saying that specifically about Tyseer going into 2025?
I think it puts them on notice that they're waiting for him to produce or expecting him to produce. I think that's a stronger word, because it's one thing where it's like, all right, let's see where the chips fall where they may, but it's another thing when you go in and the head coach is saying, look, man, I don't care how young you are, it's time to show up. And for him to say that, I think Tyseer is probably a competitor to where he's speaking to him through the media, to where it's like, hey, it's go time and it's your time. So, I mean, a little bit of motivation, but a little bit of, I guess, healthy pressure.
How did you receive that as a player whenever that came out, when it was through the media as opposed to one-to-one?
I encouraged one-to-one. You didn't really need to say anything. I mean, to the media, I was I'm going to say a confrontational player, but I had a good time talking. I was okay talking to coaches.
I remember you being outspoken in general. So you were always very confident in your abilities. So it's like, I understand that. No, it's interesting. And like I talked about it last week here on the show, is that, and James Franklin far better than I, the names that he says and the people that he does talk about are as important as the people that he doesn't talk about. And, we've heard, I remember a handful of years ago, I think maybe it was going into 22 or 23, maybe it was 23, where he was like, hey, I'm done talking about the offensive line. And then sure enough, you saw that steady progression. And Marcus Hagans was quoted this week or last week saying, it's like, we need wide receivers who are tough as shit. It just feels like that whole concept of like, hey, develop and take your time. Like there's an immediacy, there's a sense of urgency for 2025, understandably so, with a national title run in the back of everybody's mind. So looking at this wide receiver core, you're not hearing a lot of talk about Liam Clifford. Granted, he could be Mr. Reliable in a lot of ways. You know what you're getting, I guess. Caden Saunders, waiting for that to pop for years now. Anthony Ivy, waiting for that to pop for years. The names that aren't being said jump out to me as much as the names like Lyric Samuel, Kobe Howard, Matthew Otten, young players who are having their names spoken.
Like you said, I mean, like growing up and playing youth football, they say when the coach stops yelling at you, that's when you need to be concerned. Let's just leave it there.
And also, no, and to the point about that, it's like, all right, James Franklin has also talked about on 3 has said, Tyler Warren had over 100 catches last year. So he's like, those have to go somewhere. He's like, that doesn't mean they're going to go to a wide receiver. Now, you know better than I that you need a wide receiver to make plays that nobody else really within the offense can make. There's been discussion about that third running back spot being pivotal this year. And there were some injuries last year to Quentin Martin Jr. and Cam Wallace that slowed up that competition. Not to say Corey Smith was involved in that, but now you throw Tyke Hayes into the mix. So in your opinion, based on what you've seen and heard, is it like, hey, you know what? Tight ends and that number 3 wide receiver, Nick Singleton, especially, nothing against Katron, just isn't a big factor in the passing game. Is it like, hey, these guys are going to get left behind by somebody not playing wide receiver?
Possibly. Happened last year. I mean, their closest evidence of that is actually a tight end taking those catches. So, I mean, I think it comes down to playmakers in space. Receiver, tight end, running back, gadget guy, whatever you want to call it, someone that can make plays. And I think that's what it comes down to in this day and age of football. Guys that create space and take advantage of it. And on defense, guys that eliminate space and don't let that happen, right? So I think for the guys, when you talk about that Tyseer Denmark, he possesses those traits to where James is like, yo, that's something that we need, something that if we had last year, maybe have a different outcome at the end of the season. So, I mean, I think the urgency, the sense of urgency around that is right on point.
Sense of urgency, not just for Tyseer and younger players, but also Kyron Hudson and Devontae Ross. And they're getting the most attention because they transferred in when Trey Wallace and Omari Evans transferred out. Kyron Hudson, bigger, more physical receiver. Devontae Ross, smaller, shiftier, faster guy. To me, the limited clips that we've seen on social media, and you got to see it firsthand, it feels a little like, if I can make a comparison to a pro tandem at one point, the Carolina Panthers having Muhsin Muhammad and Steve Smith, and that you had the big possession receiver and you also had the shiftier guy in space. I am not putting these guys in that category, but just saying that kind of combination at those two types of bodies, essentially, two types of athletes. Would you agree with that? What would you say Hudson and Ross have looked like to your eyes?
I mean, they're similar bodies. Hudson's bigger than I thought he was coming in. He's a bigger body than that. Ross seems to move well. I mean, again, receivers, I hate to say, I mean, not that they're a dime a dozen, but the special ones are like they both have those traits that are above the line to be productive. It just now comes down to, those things happening in the season. A lot of things have to come together for them to produce. So see what happens when the season comes.
Now, I mentioned before that the names are being spoken versus the names that are not being spoken. The position group on defense that is getting most love right now is the cornerback room. And I think that's you. I think that's you having paid off the entire staff to do that. I'm kidding. No, but it's encouraging that, you did lose some guys this year. Cam Miller, Jalen Kimber. Congrats to Jalen Kimber, by the way, ran a 4.39 at his pro day. So really
speed brings opportunities, baby.
His draft stock. But going into this year, Davian Collins is getting a lot of love. And I remember a few years ago, you and I talked about it when he transferred from Mississippi State, long-term project, the vision of Terry Smith to see what he could be. And he sounds like a guy who's going to be in the mix to be a starter, at least one of those top 3 guys that you platoon out there. AJ Harris played very well to transfer from Georgia last season. Zion Tracy getting an opportunity. Cam Miller is off to Rutgers. So there's just a little bit more depth there. Antoine Belgrave Shorter. We've talked about a whole bunch of guys. Elliott Washington II, where is he going to bounce around within that secondary? Somebody who's dominated winter workouts, but those are workouts. We'll see how it translates. You hear about the cornerback room Okay, this sounds as deep as it's been in years, and at least shoot, I'm thinking the Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, and Daquan Hardy trio. It feels like maybe you don't have those, AAA across the board. It's like just feels deeper. Maybe we have to see what it turns into. But you're hearing that about the corners, right? What you're not hearing a lot about is defensive line and edge rushers. And part of that is Dennis Sutton has been recovering from this past season. So he's not been utilized or play, in spring practices all that much, understandably so. You kind of know what you're getting there. You know what you're getting there. But it is a big question mark going into the season. Depth at defensive tackle and who's that other defensive end, and then depth at defensive end. So how do you feel about that position? What have you heard? What have you seen? And also, are you concerned at all?
I'm not concerned too much. Again, the trust in my trust in that position is the coach, right? I think Dion has shown he's been able to develop players at an elite clip, and they've been able to produce each year he's been there. So, I mean, I would trust on that fact. They've been recruiting at a high level. They recruit trait-based guys. So, I mean, they do a good job in that area. So I'm not necessarily concerned.
Are you counting on Zariah Fisher to be a bigger factor this year? Maybe similar to a Tyseer Denmark, where it's like, hey, they need him to produce this year.
I think at least a valuable rotational guy is extremely valuable for the defense, right? Like having guys at the defensive line where you have depth that can play and make plays on any given time is extremely important. So as long as he's serviceable, I think that's where he can check the box or needs to check the box.
As someone who made his living in the defensive backfield, this feels like, at least at this point in the year in April, like I said, corner, defensive back in general is the strongest position group for Penn State's defense now under defensive coordinator Jim Knowles. In the event that's the case, once we get to August, September, October, November, etc., how does that fundamentally change a defense? Because the last few years, the defensive line has felt far and away the strongest unit for Penn State's defense.
I mean, I think when it comes down to that, I definitely feel when your back end is solid, it benefits the pass rush a lot more than if you have an average pass rush, let's say, and a solid back end. I think when the problem comes down to when it's a subpar pass rush and decent back end, I think that's where all defenses get in trouble. But as long as you have, I mean, I say starting on the back end, as long as you have guys that can cover in space and do all that good type of stuff, it does give the defensive line or special defensive lineman an opportunity to get that second move and third move on our offensive lineman and where plays begin to happen. Yes, if you have special defensive linemen that can beat guys and within the first second or two, that anybody can essentially play behind that. But that's just, I mean, anybody. But I think when you find that balance of getting guys that are serviceable plus up front and elite back end, you can get defensive coordinators and draw up things or create mismatches from just the pass rush standpoint. Because you got to remember, like these offensive lines just across college football, like they don't have time to prepare for super exotic blitzes as much time as they might spend in there. Like some of these defensive coordinators I know, like they get pretty creative, and that's pretty hard to pick up and check too, and all those different type of things. I mean, that's still college football, but so I say that to say that you can move defensive linemen around when they're not necessarily elite or a top 5 type of talent to make it effective when you have elite guys on the back end. And the same thing, you can cover up guys on the back end if you have elite guys up front. I think the moral of the story is like when you have elite guys anywhere, it helps somewhere.
Of course.
But the perfect thing, I think, if you were just building like serviceable plus up front, elite on the back end, always kind of, does well. But it's definitely a symbiotic relationship.
I'm thinking back to, and granted, this feels apples to oranges so badly, so forgive me, but under Manny Diaz, at defensive coordinator, the era of the blitzing defensive back was really strong for Penn State. Johnny Dixon, you and I talked about on this show, is maybe the best blitzing defensive back in America. Daquan Hardy was right behind him, no slouch in that department. Is there anybody from this existing defensive back room that you're like, yeah, that guy's got the ability to rush the passer?
I mean, AJ Harris, I think he's a great football player just in terms of how he plays, just a physical nature. I think he's someone that has that type of ability. Elliott Washington, I mean, he's a specimen from just the standpoint of how big and fast he is. Like those guys hitting the line of scrimmage with speed and the timing the right way. Yeah, you can cause some damage.
One position that people are paying attention to in terms of the competition is linebacker. And there's concern from Penn State fans of, okay, who's that next middle linebacker following in the footsteps of Kobe King? Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca playing on the edges of the defense last year, going into a 4-2-5 defense as a base in 2025. Any concerns on your front in terms of like, hey, who's going to move to that Mike spot? Is it one of those two guys? Is it somebody that we haven't talked about just yet? And there's a lot of talent that just hasn't gotten the opportunity to get out there and get experience.
No, I think Tony Rojas is probably like the main person to look out for right now, just based on, I'm not gonna say the hype, but just the expectation coming in. Flashed a little bit early in his career. He looked good from just a physical standpoint. Seeing him last week. But I would say he'd be the main person. See what Samir Robinson does from a continued development standpoint. I know Specca here from Central Catholic, who's up here. He's made some noise up there. So, I mean, it's interesting. Again, the thing that Penn State does a great job with that, I didn't fully understand when I got there, but like the way that they rotate players for them to get depth. So when they do step in, that learning curve or that gap fills in pretty fast. Like guys have some substantial foundation to build on. Like they're not typically not just stepping in and playing cold. Like they've had real game experience, and that really helps with the development of a player moving forward, which affords them the ability to recruit the way that they do and how they bring players in. So I think all these things kind of go into, the program is just trying to isolate them is an interesting conversation.
Dakari Nelson, Kari Jackson, Keon Wiley. Beckham D is a guy who was mentioned the other week by James Franklin. So some other names at linebacker for fans to pay attention to as things progress here during spring practices. And smack dab in the middle of spring practices, you have the next transfer portal window, which is, again, I can't wait for this calendar to be revised. April 16th to April 25th, the spring transfer portal window opens. So that is the middle of next week into literally the day before the blue-white game. How do you feel? I mean, it's just like, what do you do with this? If like you're trying to get everybody ready, and it's different this year. It's not going to be televised, the blue-white game, so it feels like there's maybe less pressure. But I also don't know. I mean, like as someone who's been on these staffs and is understanding how the existing coaching staff is dealing with all this stuff, how do you handle this transfer portal window in the middle of spring practices?
You just deal with it. It's unfortunate. It's bad timing. But a lot of things that come down from the NCAA are like that, right? Like it just doesn't necessarily make sense to the operational standpoint because most of them haven't been in the buildings and had to manage the actual product that's going on the field. You kind of make theoretical assumptions and rules that are up for, interpretation, and kind of move from that standpoint and just change as they go. So they're not like a true governing body looking at the league and its operations. Like the NCAA isn't necessarily that. They're just like, again, interpretation of the rules, and they hand those down. But there isn't a true performance competition governing body, because if there was, this would be a huge red flag. So again, it's always about just making sure that we're expecting the right people to do that job. The NCAA isn't a competitive like oversight committee, right? To the extent like they're more nonprofit overseers to an extent. Yeah, I mean, when you really get down to the nuts and bolts of what's actually happening, you see why those gaps exist or why they're not being addressed. Like if there's an operation that's looking at the college football as a business or competitive advantage because there's actual financial implications to the outcomes, you would realize that these operations or these mechanics that are going on in between the season doesn't really benefit the product in the fall or the people that are working the product. So that's just the reality of it. So it shows that the people at the NCAA have no idea of that gap or care. But we'll see what goes into this next thing when the power conferences come, if they create something new and bring in a commissioner and all that good stuff.
we were talking about it before about the ongoing NCAA versus the House settlement that's been in the news this week. You talk about, okay, what is the NCAA doing? And then it's also Deloitte as a third firm has been discussed as the governing body that would hand down punishments. Real NIL being a topic of conversation, having to declare any compensation that's over $600. What are some of the big things that you've heard and you think are coming down that it's like, hey, this is going to be good, this is going to be bad, this is going to change things?
I mean, I think all the teams operating under like some type of cap or budget is a positive. So now you can see who can manage the money, who's making the right evaluations and things of that nature. I don't think I understand the spirit of the $600. I don't think that's how you police that. I don't think that's aligned with like just free market laws, right? Like who's to tell you what a company values a player at if he's funny or does whatever and it just identifies to that brand audience and it's just a person, right? Like I know people that do commercials that get booked for $2,500, but like you don't know who they are. Like they're just an actor. So like why can't you like so like $600 is going to be interesting on how that holds up. But all it does is the space is very predatorial at this point, right? Because there's not really any guidelines and everyone acts like since there aren't any guidelines, no one knows what's going on. But like the fundamentals of the business are the fundamentals of the business. So I mean, when it comes down to it, they have to figure out a way to, again, when we talk about the competitive nature of the game, like that's where it has to start because you're going to be putting on a product for people to watch, for people to bet on, for people to get paid, talking about revenue sharing. So there has to be some competitive fences placed around how we're paying players, where the money's coming from, and things of that nature. And so when you look at, even in the NFL, if you want to compare the marketing dollars or marketing dollars in NFL to NIL, like only like 4 to 6% of guys in the NFL get marketing dollars. So you start to realize that, they get paid paragraph 5 money, and there's only but so many guys that are marketable just based on the commodification process of the football athlete, right? So when we think about that, I mean, you want the NCAA to put a budget on there and I guess you can police collectives to an extent or like where the marketing dollars come from. But I don't know how you police it besides it just can't come from an individual like person, like and someone just give you money. Like, but if a company's giving you money for something, like I don't know how you can tell them what your value is. I worked with Deloitte and the different big consulting firms and different things, and they just source information and give a thing. Like they're not necessarily experts in assessing a player's value in different areas. I mean, so again, when you talk about crafting leverage for an athlete and different things of that nature, there's different marks that they're going to have to hit regardless. If you want to get paid from the team, you're going to have to be a contributor to the win shares, things of that nature. If you want to make money on the free market, it's going to be based on the fundamentals. Like what do you bring to a company? What is your value proposition to the free market? As long as we can get some bounds around that and just the competitive nature for teams to be able to build sustainably, I mean, I think that is where it's going, but it's going to take another governing body to do that. Because I don't think the NCAA is fit or even built to do that.
No, certainly not fit to do that. Good Lord. I think that's been proven over and over again. To your point, it's interesting. It's like, okay, what do you value the starting quarterback at Penn State? Okay, that might be $1 million a year, $2 million a year, $3 million a year. Depends on who that guy is. Like if this is, I don't know, name a former Penn State quarterback that it's like, hey, he was not Drew Aller. And it was like, okay, well, what do you value that at? And then also to your point about, okay, how does the community feel about somebody? Joey Julius, former kicker for Penn State at one point, had a cult following and was loved by Penn State fans. Okay, so if he was in the NIL era and on this team now, for instance, would he be on every car commercial in central Pennsylvania? Absolutely. But is he the best kicker in America or something like that? That's where that argument starts to become very murky and very complicated. So just as a case study there, it's almost who's that team player, not that team player, but it's just that guy that just everybody loves him, but it's like, yeah, he's not the best player on the team, but like he just transcends that. And it's like, yeah, there's value to that. There's value to that guy for the team publicly. And it's tough to compensate that. The one thing that Penn State is attempting to do is retain the roar This campaign is once again out there. Justin, you and I have talked about this in the past. You can go to happyvalueunited.com. Retain the Roar is a campaign powered by Happy Valley United and State Media. It aims to raise $500,000 to ensure championship level talent returns and thrives under head coach James Franklin and his Penn State football staff. Tuesday, April 16th marks the opening of the transfer portal for Division I football in the spring window in a new era of college athletics that requires exceptional NIL support. Happy Valley United and State Media are committed to doing their part. That is from happyvalleyunited.com. I am just not a fan of basically putting out a GoFundMe for one of the biggest, strongest, most respected and tradition-rich programs in college football.
Yeah, I feel you. I agree.
Just,
I've been saying
the
same thing for 4 years. I mean,
it just feels like you have your hands out.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the way you gotta get the money at this point, I don't think there's time to look for a strategy. That's the name of the game, I guess. I think there's different ways, but I don't think you can be reactive and do different ways. It's like you have to build something sustainable to where these things kind of work themselves out. But you got to figure out a way to get the money in. Retain the Roar.
If you want to learn more on this subject, I've said it before, Justin is probably the most equipped to talk about this, especially in the Penn State football community, having played for the team, worked as a part of the staff at one point, what he does with the LAG Sports Group. If you're looking for more education in terms of what the House Settlement means for the sport, for the players, families, coaches, Justin's got it. So check him out on social media. In regard to Penn State football, spring practices are ongoing. Transfer portal window is going to open back up again. Blue-white game, if you're able to see it, we'll see what it is. So a lot happening right now, macro and micro, for this sport. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Follow us on social media at State of State Pod. Comment on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't done so already, you can become a member of our YouTube channel. For just 99 cents a month, you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State, plus our entire members-only playlist, ad-free, commercial-free. Hit the join button on our homepage or follow the link in the description of this podcast. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.